So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Grantham, and I'm the Principal Deputy Associate Administrator for OPA here at headquarters. Thanks so much for joining us at the inaugural session of the EPA 50th Anniversary History Series. Welcome to the regions and offices who are joining us by VTC today. We've teamed up with the EPA Alumni Association to present this series. As you may know, we have themes for each month 2020, and we plan to hold this history series with EPA Alumni Association each month. The monthly themes are, this month, a cleaner, healthy environment for all, February, protecting America's waters, March, chemical safety, April, 50 years of Earth Day, May, improving the nation's air, June, effective partnerships, July, cleaning up the nation's land, August, research for a healthier environment, September, environmental emergency preparedness, October, protecting children's health, November, ensuring environmental compliance, and December, inspiring the next generation of environmental leaders. For each month, a member of the Alumni Association will join a senior career leader in the relevant program office to present a session for the EPA at 50 series. Our communications and social media will also reflect the monthly theme led by the program offices. Every program office and region has a representative of the EPA 50th work group. Please reach out to them with your ideas. We have an active intranet and EPA.gov website, so take a look at those. And in March, we will launch a website with EPA at 50 t-shirts, tote bags, and other items available for purchase. And Chuck, EPA alumni, will be able to purchase those items as well. A plug for EPA cleanup events at headquarters and across the country on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day on April 22nd. There will be cleanup events in all regions and at RTP in Cincinnati, and we invite everyone to participate. There is so much happening for the 50th, partnerships with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, recognition of our 8 remaining charter employees, yes, staff who have been here for 50 years since the very beginning, including, and lots more, including a big event on December 2nd, 2020, to which all of the former administrators have been invited. The EPA Alumni Association is also hosting events on December 2nd, and we are closely coordinating so everyone can attend all of the events. Maggie Sauerhag and Shakiba Carter-Jenkins, who are here today, are our coordinators for the 50th, and Maggie has some examples of history that we are combing through. She will send them around for folks to look at. Going back in my own EPA history, I should add that this morning I had the pleasure of having coffee with Gordon Bender, who is Administrator Riley's Chief of Staff. I was in Region 1 at the time, and that was before our administrators had security details. So those of us in public affairs were the drivers when the administrators came to the regions. A memory from way back then, the state of Boston Harbor was a very big deal because it was very dirty. Our regional administrator at the time, Julie Balaga, told me in confidence that then President H.W. Bush was coming to tour Boston Harbor with Administrator Riley, a very close hold. The day before the big event, the RA started talking to me about the plans for the day. I must have looked perplexed. I didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, "Don't you remember this?" And I said, I put it so far back in my mind because it was such a close hold that I forgot. Fortunately, I regained ground, and we had a very successful event as the president, the administrator, and the RA toured a then very dirty Boston Harbor on a motorboat. I am sure Region 1 would be proud to boast about a now sparkling Boston Harbor should our current administrator wish to tour on a motorboat as well. So today we welcome Chuck Elkins from the EPA Alumni Association. After Chuck graduated from Yale Law School in 1966, he moved to the Office of Management and Budget, where he handled many of the environmental programs. In 1970, when President Nixon wanted to create EPA, Chuck was detailed to be the deputy director of the committee of the Ash Council that was putting the reorganization of EPA together. The director of the committee was none other than Doug Kossel, who would later become EPA administrator. Chuck wrote much of the reorganization plan, number 3, that created EPA, and then testified before Congress to explain it. When the agency opened its doors, Chuck became a special assistant to Bill Ruckelshaus, the first administrator. So I guess, Chuck, you were also a charter employee. Chuck stayed another 25 years serving in various senior management positions, including acting assistant administrator for hazardous materials, acting assistant administrator for air and radiation on 2 occasions over a total of 2 years, director of toxic substances, director of the noise control program, and associate general counsel. In 2008, Chuck co-founded the EPA Alumni Association and became its volunteer executive director, where he continues to serve. The association today has nearly 2,000 members spread across the country and is working with us here at EPA to help present this series on the history of EPA. Please join me in welcoming Chuck Elkins back to EPA. Oops, I don't want to take yours. I don't want to take yours, Chuck.
Yeah, don't take my talking points. Well, hi, 50 years, long time. Is there anybody here who was here in 1970 when the doors opened up, a charter member? There are some, you say, still in the agency. I'm 80 years old, so they would be about my age, or they were really young when they came to work for the agency. So here we are, thinking back to 1970, and why is history important? Well, for most of the things we do in life, it's not that important. But each of you, when you came to EPA, in a figurative way, you picked up the baton from somebody else who had been carrying the baton before you. And actually, if you look at history, it goes all the way back, the handing back of the baton, back to 1970, and for many cases, even beyond that, before that. And so it's helpful to think, what were they thinking when they made some of the decisions that shaped this agency? And I'm going to try to give you some sense of the early years of EPA. I was only one actor. There were 5,799 others of us when the door opened. And so there are 5,799 other stories, but I'm going to try to give you a story and give you a picture of it. So I'm going to try to leave 10 or 15 minutes for you to ask some questions, so be thinking about that. So before there was an EPA, there was a lot of activity in the environment. We had state programs, we had local programs. They were reasonably weak, and the federal program was considerably weak. It was primarily giving technical assistance. I say weak only in perspective because now the agency is so strong. At the time, we thought they were pretty good. But the environment topic had begun to gain interest as those years went by. And I'll just run through some of these things that sort of began to build up to 1970. We had Rachel Carson write Silent Spring and show us that the bald big eagle and others were threatened by pesticides. That was a new thought for most Americans. We had, that's not a good picture, but it's this oil spill in Santa Barbara, just off the coast of beautiful beaches. That really shocked people to think that such great damage could take place simply because a well blew out. We know better now, of course, ourselves, having experienced some of that since that time. Here's the Cuyahoga catching on fire. It actually caught on fire 13 times, but the last time, Time magazine wrote it up. And so Americans learned that our rivers were so polluted that they would catch fire. Here we have Pittsburgh during the day. One of the things that people learned if they lived in Pittsburgh is you should take a second white shirt to work. If you're a man, you wore a white shirt and a tie, take a second one, because by noon you had to change it because it had soot all over it. In Denora, and this is back in '48, but 21 people died in 3 or 4 days because of an inversion over the valley. A smelter was there. They finally convinced the smelter to shut down on Sunday. It started on Thursday. They finally shut down on Sunday. But then the inversion lifted. 21 people died, but then the smelter said on Monday, okay, we're back to work. Then we had what all of you know about, the Los Angeles smog, where people really worried about their health. So we get to 1970, and the National Environmental Policy Act had just been passed. I happened to write the memo to the president about whether he should sign it. Every time the president signs a bill, somebody in OMB writes a little note that says, you should sign this or not. And I got to write that note, and I said, NEPA, environmental impact statements. You could drive a truck through this statute. You don't need to worry about signing this. Just go on and sign it, Mr. President. Nothing's going to happen much about this. Showed how much I knew at age 29. So he signed it. But after that, the president decided he wanted to have an environmental message, be the first president to have an environmental message. And this is a picture of all of us that worked on that message. I'm standing. You see this big gap between these two people? This is the president, President Nixon. That's me. I decided he didn't want to stand next to a Democrat. Everybody else in that room was a Republican, and so I figured I wouldn't want to pollute him. I don't think he found out anyway. I think I probably skipped the slide on Earth Day, did I? But we also had Earth Day in April of that year. But the president wanted to have an environmental message, and just to give you a sense of what the president said, he wanted a 5-year, $10 billion water pollution program, and he wanted the air pollution program to invent a virtually pollution-free automobile in 5 years. Didn't quite get there, but we did get the money for the water pollution. So the president created the Ash Council. The Ash Council was a group working on reorganization. One of the things they decided would be a good thing to organize would be all the environmental programs across the federal government. And so we created that by reorganization, and we sold it to the Congress on the basis of we need to have coordination among all these programs, from Interior, Agriculture, Interior, HEW, and we also need to take away from these agencies that have resource development missions, such as Agriculture and Interior, for instance, and the Atomic Energy Commission, those things that involved in controlling the environment, because we saw it as a conflict of interest for those agencies to have those functions. Remarkably, when you look back on it today, we did not sell this as a major regulatory program, because at the time we created it, it really wasn't. Let me just mention a few things that we decided. I'm sorry, my voice is a little weak. A few things we decided about this agency when we got started. First of all, we decided there are a number of programs that should not come, even though we think of them as environmental programs. And so we thought fish and wildlife from Interior shouldn't come, because that's not environmental protection. Occupational and safety and health, what deals with the same chemicals, but no, that's occupational, so leave that behind. Rat control was one of the major environmental programs in HEW. We decided we didn't want it. The radiation program, we definitely wanted to take the radiation program as it related to power plants away from AEC, but we didn't want to take the control of microwaves and that sort of equipment away from HEW. So we split the HEW program in half. We did that by having the director and the deputy director choose up teams. So the director would say, "You're staying," and the deputy director would say, "You're going," and they went back and forth until they went through the entire staff. You have to ask for the people who came whether they got the right choice. I think they sort of knew who wanted to come and who didn't. So we made some other choices. We decided that this would be a single head agency. It would not be a commission. It would not be like the FTC, the CSPC, where you would have 5 commissioners who were appointed for 5 years or whatever. This White House wanted to have this reporting directly to the White House and one person, so there could be an interaction, a positive interaction between the president and the agency, and also to have political appointees. And we started off with 7, as I remember. The regions, it was not automatic to know what we wanted to do on the regions. But it was particularly difficult for the water program because they were spread around the country based on river basins. And we decided we had to have all the regions co-located, so we moved everybody to the 10 regional cities, and that was, and that we would have the regions be a very strong function in this agency. A couple other decisions we made, one that I was responsible for, which was a stupid mistake. I'm telling you all my stupid mistakes, was I said we should put the air and water program together under a single administrator. Why would we want to do that? Well, because many of their programs are very similar compared to, say, the pesticide program. I said they will learn from each other, and each program will strengthen the other. Well, that was a stupid idea because they never talked to each other, even though they're under the same system administrator. But that resulted then in all the other programs being under a system administrator. We called system administrator for categorical programs. The air and water were the media programs, so the other programs were the categorical. We finally turned it into hazardous materials control. We thought that sounded better. So we ended up with a $1.4 billion budget, which is not insignificant, and 5,800 employees. So as we opened the doors, suddenly 5,800 people worked for us. Most of them didn't know it. And we just told them, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be back in touch later. And it worked. So one of the major decisions we made, that the president made, was to choose Bill Ruckelshaus as the first administrator, and you'll see in a couple minutes why that was so important. But he of course came back later, for a second term, but his personality and his way of approaching the environment really shaped the way the agency grew, and I think we still see those influences today. So he decided that he wanted to make sure that people across this country really knew that EPA was open for business. And the world has changed with the creation of EPA. So 8 days after he opened the doors, he went down to the annual Congress of Cities in Atlanta, where all the city mayors gathered together. And he announced he was suing the city of Atlanta for their water pollution. Now that really went over well. You can imagine his standing up on the stage and telling them that. And he also said there are other cities that were coming in the same. And they said, why are you suing us? You haven't given us a grant yet for our sewage treatment plant. And here's what he said. The responsibilities which are entrusted to this new agency I must meet head-on today. A gross pollution problem exists in Atlanta, Georgia, and clearly something must be done about it. The Chattahoochee River flows clean and clear above Atlanta, but when it reaches the great city, 32 million gallons of untreated effluents are dumped into it daily, along with another 40 million gallons of only primary treatment. Beneath the city of Atlanta, the Chattahoochee River, an interstate stream, flows into Alabama. It is a virtual open sewer. So he essentially told the cities, time is up. You're supposed to have been cleaning up your pollution. You haven't done it, and we're suing you. And then the next week, he went off to see Jones and Lawton Steel Corporation for discharging cyanide into the Cuyahoga River, and he sued them. And they set up a new department in the Department of Justice to handle all these suits, which is still the case today, as you know. He filed a lot more water pollution cases. 13 months after that, Birmingham had such an inversion that it was a public health issue, and he ordered that all the major industries in the city shut down. Now, you could ask me, where did he get all this authority? Sometimes I'm not sure he knew where he had the authority. Maybe in the Clean Air Act you can shut down a city. I never looked. I never had to do that. But anyway, he set the tone that there's a new sheriff in town. This was going to be a regulatory agency. It was going to really make a difference. So one of the major things that we did, I think without thinking about it very clearly, was to essentially put EPA right in the middle of all these other agencies, and we took a lot of their power authority and put it in EPA. And Bill Riley once said, he went to I think it was Bill, said this, that he went to a cabinet meeting, and one of the cabinet members said, Mr. President, the problem with this EPA is they're in everybody's knickers. Well, that is what actually we did, wasn't it? We essentially had EPA interacting, hopefully in a positive way, with agriculture, energy, transportation, interior, and the others. And you can imagine these other secretaries found, particularly in the early days, found this to be very frustrating. One of the results of that is the quality of life review that OMB set up as a result to try to balance the interaction between these other agencies and EPA so that there was dialogue within the executive office of the president about who's in whose knickers and how do we work together and try to have both development and the environmental protection. I guess the one other thing I want to say before I turn to the Congress is I thought it was a poor use of money at the time. Once again, I'm telling you all the silly things that I thought. We started environmental education as a major component of this agency because someone had enough wisdom to say, we need to change the way the new generation thinks about the environment. And I think we're seeing the benefits of that early decision. We put a lot of effort into it, and I think had good results. Turning now to the Congress, we suddenly had a combined, strong agency, and what the Congress did in response, and this made a lot of difference, was to give us the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the RCRA program, the Noise Control Program, Toxic Substances Control Act, revised the Pesticide Act. So they basically took what was somewhat of a hollow agency. We gave primarily technical assistance and gave this agency the regulatory authorities that, of course, you're all familiar with. That really was an important part of gearing up the agency. And this happened fairly quickly in the early 1970s. All was not sweetness and light, of course. They had, when we started, 14 committees that thought they should have jurisdiction over our programs because we'd taken them all away from other people. When Ruckelshaus came back, he noticed that there were 50 of these oversight committees. I personally testified 25 times in front of Congress. You know, they just wanted hearings all the time, and you didn't have enough political. I was not a political appointee. We didn't have enough people to go up, so they would send people like me up there. Most of the time, I was scared to death. I want to talk about environmental groups. When the agency was created, of course, the NGOs were fairly young at that time, but they thought, you know, a gift from heaven that EPA had been created, and they saw us as a partner and also an agency that was really going to now begin to deal with these pollution problems that they've been talking about for some time. And so what we found was really a great way to do business was we would hold a meeting on a particular issue, and we would invite industry to come in and sit on this side of the table, and the environmentalists would sit on this side of the table, and we would sit there like judges. We wouldn't say anything. We just listen. They would argue the case, and we'd say thank you very much, and they would go home. And based on the additional staff work, of course, I don't mean we depended on just that meeting, but we were able to make a decision, hopefully good decisions, having heard both sides, almost like a court in a way. But over time, for various reasons, the environmental groups decided they didn't like this. And so they wouldn't come to our meetings. And the change was then that I'm sitting there and the industry comes in and my staff is sitting there, and we would have to argue the environmental case, and the industry, of course, would argue about cost and was this reasonable, whatever, you know, good arguments. But by the time, here you are arguing the case, and then you're supposed to be the decision maker. And I just tell you, the good old days in the early 70s when you didn't have to argue the case yourself, you let other people argue it. So shortly after all this sort of began to happened, I went up to a conference at Yale, and they had a bunch of environmental groups there, and I complained about this, that they wouldn't come to our meetings anymore. And they said, Chuck, can't we trust you to make the right decision? And it's like, yeah, right, but you could help a little bit more if you would. But during my tenure, they never really came back. I'm going to go through a few of my little stories that might illustrate what life was like in what I would call the Wild West of the early days of the agency. One of the things that we had to struggle with was coyotes out west. They were, there they are. They were not very friendly to the sheep. And the sheep growers, who call themselves wool growers, were really up in arms because we had taken off the market these collars that you could put around a sheep's neck, and the coyote would bite the collar, trying to kill the sheep, and it would poison the coyote. That was great as far as it went, I suppose, if you wanted to save the sheep, but it would then poison the birds and other things that ate the coyote. So we took that off the market. So the wool growers were saying, you got to do something for us. And I was sympathetic to that. I was the acting assistant administrator. So I said, well, we have this new device now that's a cyanide gun that you plant in the ground, and the coyote bites it, and it shoots cyanide into his mouth, and he dies very quickly, hopefully humanely. And it doesn't kill all the other non-target animals. I said, that's the best we got. We'll never get it through the registration process for years. I said, why don't we have an experimental permit over 15 states, and we will collect the data to see if it does kill other animals. In the meantime, people in 15 states can use this device. Well, of course, the wool growers were happy about that, but the state of Wyoming and the Humane Society both sued, and they put my name on the lawsuit. They sued me personally, and which I then went home that night, and I said, I have bad news for you. I was sued by the state of Wyoming and by the Humane Society. And my son, who was 10 years old, said, what about the inheritance? I said, I have bad news for you. I work for the government. There is no inheritance. But don't worry, the Justice Department will protect me, all right? So I kept calling the Justice Department and saying, okay, we got this lawsuit, and we're going into district court in that case as opposed to appellate court. And so you need, you're going to put me on the witness stand, and we want to win this case. This is really important. And he never would call me back. Finally, the day of the trial, I show up, and there's the lawyer. Hi, how are you? I said, you hope you're going to protect me. He said, piece of cake. I said, what? How is this a piece of cake? He says, the Humane Society is here. It's the same guy. And this Humane Society was arguing that you should not use a chemical to kill the coyotes. You should shoot them instead. And he said, this is the same guy that last week was in Florida in the trial, and he was saying that shooting animals with a gun is inhumane. So he got him up on the stand and said, are you the same person? And the guy sort of collapsed, and we won the lawsuit. And we, of course, the state of Wyoming, I didn't tell you why the state of Wyoming was mad. I had said this experimental permit should only be on private lands. Because I'm an Easterner, I don't really realize that in Wyoming they have almost nothing except public lands, and they raise sheep all the time on these public lands. I had said, no, we're not going to use this chemical on these public lands, and so they basically were cut out of the program, and that's why they were suing me. Let me see how I'm doing on the time. I'm going to skip that story and tell you about dioxin. There we are. I was running the Toxic Substances Control Program at the time, sitting at my desk, and this guy comes in from the water program and hands me this package. He says, this is yours. I open it up. It's a study that says that when you put coffee through a white bleached coffee filter, the dioxin, which is created in that coffee filter by treating it with chlorine, comes out into the coffee. and they said, we, the water program, regulate this paper industry, but we decided this was your problem in the toxic substance program. I read that, and my first reaction was, boy, this is going to be a really tough press conference to tell people they should not be drinking coffee, because almost all the coffee was made in one way or the other with these filters. So I immediately, I called in my staff, and I said, we have this secret project. I gave it a code name so that people in the rest of the office wouldn't know what it was. I said, I don't know whether we have 1 day or 2 days. We have to decide what level of dioxin can be in this paper filter and still not give people more than 1 chance in a million of getting cancer. And so they were scrambling around trying to figure out this number. I said, I don't know when this is going to hit. And I went upstairs to see Jack Moore, who was the assistant administrator. He was a toxicologist, thank goodness. So I said, Jack, when the press conference comes, it's yours. And what we're going to do is hand you the number. This is the right number to be safe, okay? He said, okay. So we go back down, we keep working on this thing. And about a week later, we had a whole week, Phil Shabakov, who was the science writer at the New York Times, calls up and says, Chuck, I've been away on vacation for a week, but I opened up this package that's on my desk, and it says that there's dioxin in these filters. Can we talk about that? And I said, Phil, I'd love to talk to you, but not right now. I'll call you back. And I went running upstairs. I said to Jack Moore, we got to have this press conference. And two hours later, we have this press conference. And we tell everybody that there's dioxin in these filters. First question, Dr. Moore, how serious is this? Dr. Moore says, oh, it's not nearly as serious as when we had this other pesticide problem, and he goes and describes this other pesticide problem. That didn't work. Dr. Moore, are you still drinking coffee? Yes, I am still drinking coffee through these filters. Thank God he didn't change the way he was drinking coffee. That was the end of the press conference. He was drinking the coffee. It must be okay. All right. So of course that wasn't okay from a health point of view. The paper industry immediately started producing the brown paper ones, and then they worked to get the dioxin down to essentially zero. They changed the chlorinating process. So I thought, okay, we dodged a bullet on that one. 2 or 3 days later, this guy in Canada decided he would look at milk cartons. Yeah, they were made out of paper. And we had made the engineering judgment that this was not a problem. I mean, we know about the environment. We're good engineers or whatever. That dioxin is in the paper. There's wax in between the milk and the paper. Not a problem. This guy up in Canada, decided he would test it. I don't know why scientists want to do this. Anyway, he tested it, and sure enough, this dioxin is, I should have said this about the coffee beans, it's lipophilic, means it's attracted to fat. So that's what was happening with the coffee beans. The coffee beans have fat in it, and that was what was pulling the dioxin out of the paper. Well, lo and behold, what does milk have in it? Fat. And for some reason, it was able to pull it right through that wax into the milk. So we switched to plastic and glass bottles really fast. And now, of course, the industry is, I'm told, I'm not there anymore, has fixed this problem. They fixed it pretty fast right after that. It was the interim period that I was really worrying about, that nobody was going to be able to drink any coffee. Let me finish up with my favorite story, and then we'll have some questions and answers and stuff. I was acting assistant administrator for pesticides in those early days. Once a political appointee left, and I was there doing that, and I find out that the chickens in Mississippi have eaten some grain or food that had a pesticide in it, aldrin-dieldrin, I believe it was, and that they didn't know what to do about these chickens. There are 20 million chickens in Mississippi. all potentially infected or contaminated. Mississippi was just getting into the chicken business. They really wanted to have this as one of the industries that was going to make the state economy go well. And so they wanted to know what to do about these chickens. The problem I had was that on this particular chemical, the deputy administrator and the administrator were recused from saying anything about aldrin dieldrin because of a lawsuit. So I was the senior person to make the decision. I couldn't talk to anybody upstairs. I couldn't do what I normally do, which was, well, we have option A, and we have option B, and we have option C. And Mr. Administrator, I think we should do option B. And then he would say, okay, option B. Well, who made the decision? He made the decision, not me. But in this case, I had to make this decision. So I was fit to be tied. And we were trying to figure out, once again, what would one case in a million level be for aldrin dieldrin in these chickens. And you had to worry about how much chicken people ate and over what period of time. I mean, you're familiar with risk assessment. It's not as simple. Even back then, we realized it wasn't too simple, although we were new at it. So I'm sitting there on a Friday afternoon trying to make a decision, and I say, I just don't know what the right decision is to do here. And I said, I think I'll just wait over the weekend, think about it, and then Monday morning, I'll make a decision. The phone rings, and there's this guy, this farmer from Mississippi. He says, Mr. Elkins, what are you doing about these chickens? I said, well, I'm working on it, and I'm going to work on it over the weekend, and we'll make a decision on Monday. He says, don't do that. He says, it costs me $50,000 a day to feed these chickens on my farm. And if you decide on Monday, that means I have to feed these chickens on Saturday and Sunday, and it's a waste of money. And secondly, you're not thinking about just telling us that these chickens are okay if they're, a certain level of the pesticide in the chicken, are you? And I said, well, yeah, we are thinking about that. He says, don't do that. He says, we're trying to become the main supplier for McDonald's, and we don't want to be known as the Mississippi chickens that have cancer, that cause cancer. So I hung up, and I said, we can sit here and do all this risk assessment stuff, and I'm trying to do something that makes sense and that doesn't destroy the chicken industry in Mississippi, but still do the right thing for public health. I think he's told me that the only thing that makes sense for both the chicken industry and for public health is to kill these 20 million chickens. So at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, I said, these chickens have to be killed, 20 million chickens. An hour later, Senator Stennis calls up. He's the senator from Mississippi. He says, Mr. Elkins, I've been holding off calling you because I didn't want to interfere, which I thought actually was really nice in a way. I don't think that happens all the time. Anyway, he says, but now, let me tell you this. We have to do something with those 20 million chickens you just told us to kill. And I guess we're going to have to bury them. And I'll be darned if we're going to bury these chickens, and then 2 months later, you're going to come down here and tell us that we didn't bury them correctly. And he says, that's just not going to happen. I want your person in the governor's office at 9 o'clock Monday morning, and you're going to tell us how to bury these chickens. So it happened because my assistant administratorship was everything except air and water, so I had the solid waste program too. So I called up the director of solid waste, who wasn't involved at all in this chicken thing. I said, I don't have time to tell you anything, just get on the airplane to Atlanta, call me when you get there, I'll have time to tell you what to do. He calls me from Atlanta. I brief him about the whole thing. I said, you need to be in the governor's office at 9 o'clock. He was there. He stayed for a couple of months. I don't know what he did about his clothes. I guess he came back to get some. These are technical matters I didn't worry about. Lo and behold, we buried 20 million chickens. And despite the concern of Senator Stennis that when you bury a chicken, it blows up and in decaying processing comes back up, almost all those chickens stayed buried. And so that was a success for the solid waste program and for the pesticide program. So let me turn to the last slide. No, the one just before that. It's easy for me to say, but if you work in a program and you don't know the history of it, you might be able to do your job better if you did know the history, and we have done you a favor. We have written a 20-page document on each of the programs. It's called Half Century of Progress. It will give you a snapshot view of the last 50 years of the program. And if you're working with another program you don't work with, say you work in the pesticide program, but you're working with the water program, you might want to read the water program one too, so you'd understand the people in the water program that you're trying to network with. So these are a pretty easy read. We're updating them now, but they're still there, and you'll find some videos and other stuff. So there's a lot of history there. So next slide, and we're on to some, do I leave enough time? Yes, for some questions and comments. No questions? That's not nice to a speaker. Yes?
Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Hi, thanks for your great presentation. I'm wondering why EPA is not a cabinet level agency or department, or was that thought of at all, or how did that come about?
Yes, at the time, I don't think they would have taken the risk to make it a cabinet level. President Nixon, you heard me say he had first environmental message, created EPA. You'd think he's a great environmentalist, right? No, when we chose, I'll tell you my story about Bill Ruckelshaus in a minute, if it fits in here. He came over to essentially meet the team that was putting EPA together for the first time. He hadn't been announced yet. And Howard Mesner, some of you may have met Howard. He's passed on now, but Howard was sort of the administrative guru setting the agency up. He takes Ruckelshaus to the window of a 10-story building. He says, "See over there? That's Waterside Mall. And it's a great place for your office, and we had it really close to the White House because we know the president's going to call you to the White House a lot of times, and you'll be able to get there at a moment's notice." I was disappointed because I lived near Tyson's Corner, and I was hoping we were going to be at Tyson's Corner. But so what Bill Ruckelshaus said later, and some of you may have heard him say this, is he got called to the White House twice, and in his first term, and one of those times, Nixon said, "Well, what are those crazy people over at EPA trying to get you to do now, Bill?" So make it a cabinet agency? No, I don't think so. It has been proposed, and essentially EPA has cabinet status, I believe. I don't know, I'm not current, but at least during many of the years that I was here, the EPA administrator was sitting in on cabinet meetings. And so maybe you don't have the status, but you were there because people, you were in their knickers, and so the people knew you were there. So I think the difference, I don't know, we'd have to think about it, but is there really a difference? I don't think too much. Other questions? Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. If any of you work in a laboratory or work with people who are in EPA laboratories, one of the things that we decided to do actually was bring the laboratories over from the other agencies. And I think I get credit for that. Most of the people were saying, they don't need these laboratories. I mean, no, leave those back in the departments. The one laboratory I didn't get to come because HEW was too adamant was the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, NIEHS, which then meant we had to build that capability within EPA. But on a lot of the other capabilities, we didn't need to, or at least we had a good place to start because we brought, I don't know, 15, 20 laboratories over, and I think that made a difference. And it made EPA clearly a science agency as well as a regulatory agency. And if we didn't have the science, I think the way people would look at us would be different. I mean, they still think we don't know anything about science. I say we. They think you don't know anything about science, but in fact, you have a whole science establishment, and I think that was a major decision that was made. Who else had a question?
Thank you so much for sharing some pretty remarkable and entertaining stories. I'm wondering, since leaving, has there been any cases where you've looked at a certain program or a certain incident with EPA and you just thought, gee, I wish I was a part of that, or I wish I had I could go back and participate in that?
See, I'm not sure I understand you. Are there, give me the last part again. My hearing is not too good.
Sorry, has there been any program or any situation from EPA that you've looked at and you thought, gee, I wish I could have participated in that, or I could still work with that particular part of the program?
Well, if you heard my history, I worked in most of the programs. I loved every one of them. And I think thinking back, and in fact there's a video on our website about this, is the early days in California on the air pollution program, where Los Angeles was having all those problems. We didn't have the foggiest about what to do about that, and the regional office wrote basically transportation plans for Los Angeles that, in terms of control how many parking lots it has and this sort of thing. I think that would have been a fun time, although scary as well, because we didn't really know what to do. But the California story on air pollution, of course, is a big success, and we should all be proud of how the agency really grabbed hold of that and has made a difference. Yes?
Yeah, Chuck, thanks a lot for spending the hour with us. You had mentioned that Richard Nixon talked in terms of a $10 billion program for water quality improvement. It's my understanding that he actually vetoed the Clean Water Act.
Well, I think,
and I'm wondering if some comment on his interest in the $10 billion water quality improvement program and his reasoning for vetoing the Clean Water Act, which I think was overridden by Congress.
Yeah, I don't remember the reason for his veto. I remember that it did happen, I think. But what he did do in the budget is he did put billions of dollars in for sewage treatment. Most of that $1.4 billion we brought into the agency was for water treatment plants, and if I remember correctly, a lot of that was new that year. May be wrong about that, but I think he did fund the program some, and a lot of his ideas that he announced in the environmental message, I think, got built into the Clean Water Act. But keep in mind how that message was built. You saw the lineup of all these people. Those are the people who wrote that message, not President Nixon. And we all sat around the table and dreamed up great things to do in the environment. And he signed it. So did he believe all of it? No, I doubt it. But it made him look really good. Some people think the reason he did that was because he thought that Senator Muskie, who was the senior environmental person in the Senate, was going to run for president, and that Nixon needed to get some credentials. That seems very cynical, but maybe it was true. So I don't really know that. But we are having next month is Water Month, and the person who comes might know the answer to that. I don't guarantee. Sure. I think we may want to have one on safe drinking water and one on water pollution. They're too big to fit in one meeting.